My name is Rose. I'm 34 years old, and I live with my husband, Mark. We both work at the company that my father-in-law founded. My father-in-law has already retired, but he built up a small construction company into a business with annual sales of $173 million. It seems that he played hardball like acquiring rival construction companies, but everyone praises his business skills. My husband, who was to follow in his father's steps, had a pampered upbringing as their only son and has a gentle character that doesn't seem to really apply in this harsh, cold world. Although being gentle sounds nice, in reality he is an indecisive person who can't make decisions about anything, and I started to feel that he was unsuitable as both a husband and a company manager. Even my husband would say things like,
"I'm not cut out to be a manager, so even if I become the CEO, I'll probably just only look like a CEO. That's easier for me."
showing that he wasn't seriously thinking about taking over the company. We've been married for 5 years now, but recently I've been particularly dissatisfied with my husband's lack of initiative. In contrast to my husband, I consider myself a decisive person, and when my father-in-law was active, he seemed to like that about me and gave me various jobs. Before I got married, I used to work at a bank, so I always work while paying attention to the numbers. I quit the bank when I got married, intending to become a full-time housewife, but my father-in-law asked me to work at the construction company, so I decided to do that. Shortly after I started working, my father-in-law started inviting me to meetings, where board members would participate and ask for my opinions about management. At first, the directors seemed to question why the founder's daughter-in-law was invited to important meetings, but as I gave appropriate opinions, they started to listen to me. My husband was also a director, but he didn't participate in the meetings, and both the directors and my father-in-law seemed to think that was normal at this point. After the meetings, when I returned home, my husband would be watching TV with a carefree look on his face. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting? You're an important director. You need to be aware of that." As I spoke angrily, my husband argued, thinking that he did nothing wrong.
"Even if I attend, I don't understand the content of the discussions well, and the directors like you better, so there's no problem, right?"
I wonder if he doesn't like me participating in the board meetings because he said such things like that. My father-in-law has been teaching me about running the company in detail, and it seems like he wants me to be his successor. At first, I was also new to the management, but I started to enjoy the work, and before I knew it, I was working hard to live up to my father-in-law's expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law fully retired. The directors also started consulting me when they needed to make important decisions, and my husband was being ignored. I thought that if such a situation like this happened, my husband would regret and devote himself more to his work. But on the contrary, he became less dedicated than ever before. He would go to work in the morning, but he would go out somewhere before noon and then return home. Even when he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work, and it seemed he didn't care about the company at all. On the other hand, I was getting busier as my work at the company increased. After my father-in-law retired, the executives started relying more on me, and I was assigned tasks more like a CEO. It's a big company with many employees, and for the sake of those employees, I was doing my best to increase the company's sales and profits. With the efforts of the employees, sales began to increase, and I became more interested in managing the company and became absorbed in my work. On the other hand, my husband seemed to lose interest in work, and he began to show up at the company less and less. The conversations between us at home decreased, and our relationship became strained. And during that time, my husband came home and began to say this.
I ran into Maria today and we had lunch together.
He casually mentioned this. My sister is 2 years older than me, and she had just divorced half a year ago. The cause of the divorce was my sister's affair, and it caused a big commotion when my sister's angry husband stormed into our parents' house. My husband went to my parents' house to calm my sister's husband, as I was busy at work. Having a pampered upbringing and being gentle, my husband persuaded my sister's husband, who reluctantly left at that time, and my sister later said, "The company's CEO is really amazing." He led my husband back home, who was really enraged. She was praising my husband. My husband, with his calm attitude and laid-back way of speaking, probably managed to defuse my sister's angry husband. My sister was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony, but it seemed that her view of my husband changed after this incident. Until then, she seemed to consider my husband, who was not particularly good-looking and indecisive, as nothing more than a rich guy. But she seemed to have convinced herself that he was a reputable company executive. My sister also became single after her divorce, and she always loved rich people. So to her, my husband must have seemed like a good catch. But I, who was absorbed in my work, never imagined such a thing would happen. And of course, my sister would not know that my husband is just a director and is not involved in the management of the company. My sister's divorced husband was an elite employee at a foreign company, and she was bragging to me at their wedding. "My husband is an excellent employee, so his salary is high and he's handsome. So you must be jealous." Indeed, my sister's ex-husband was good-looking and sharp-minded, and he always gave off a stylish vibe when he was talking. I couldn't understand why my sister, who had such a wonderful husband, would have an affair. 3 months had passed since my husband told me he had dinner with my sister.
"Rose, I need to talk to you."
Hearing those words from my husband for the first time gave me a bad feeling. As I nervously waited for him to speak,
"Actually, your sister is pregnant with my child, so I want a divorce."
I was shocked at the divorce request, but even more surprised to learn that my sister was pregnant. As I was left speechless, my husband continued.
"On my next day off, your sister is going to come here and have a discussion, so please, cooperate."
Bewildered by his request, I asked my husband, "So, you want to marry my sister?" Seeing the troubled look on my husband's face,
"I don't necessarily want to get married, but if a child is involved, there's no choice."
Frustrated with my indecisive husband, I answered with a sigh. "Well, if there's a child involved, there's no choice. Let's talk about the future when my sister comes." Knowing that I wouldn't be able to decide anything by talking to my husband, I decided to meet my sister directly. Although I was thinking about a divorce, I had to discuss the company's matters with my father-in-law. As the wife of the founder's son, I was involved in the company's management, but after the divorce, I would just be a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-law's house and told my father-in-law what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was happy that my husband had a child, but she became quiet when my father-in-law glared at her. It seems my mother-in-law cares more about her grandchildren than the company's management. After thinking for a while, my father-in-law spoke with a smile.
Rose, I want you to continue participating in the company's management as usual. I don't care about Mark. I will take the responsibility, so let him do as he likes.
It seems my father-in-law cares more about the company's management than his son or grandchildren. Although he has retired, my father-in-law still has a say in the company, and he owns a large portion of the company's shares, so there are no executives who would oppose to his will. I was also finding the job interesting, so it was regrettable to give it up at this point. Now that the work issue has been settled, it's time to talk about the future with my sister. My sister, who visited our house on her day off, smiled and said, "It's too bad you couldn't have a child, Rose, isn't it? I'll give you a lot of alimony. Please, leave this house immediately." She spoke with a victorious smirk. My husband just kept silent, merely listening to our conversation without saying anything. Despite being the very cause of the problem, my husband just sat there, with an uninterested look on his face, which left me flabbergasted. I'm fine with a divorce, but we need to talk about compensation and division of property. I think it's best to get a lawyer and make everything clear. I never thought you would fall for someone like Mark, who's nothing special. I responded to my sister sarcastically. For a moment, my sister gave me a stern look, but her face quickly returned to a smirk. I finally understand that it's not about looks, but what's inside that matters with men. I was amused by her claiming to fully understand my husband, and while trying not to laugh, I said, "That's good for you then. I hope you and Mark live happily together." She might have been talking about his money. She seemed to assume that my husband was the CEO of my father-in-law's company, but it appeared she hadn't heard anything from him. After the discussion ended, my sister stated she would start living here. As she had brought a moving company, I took only the essentials and left. Knowing my quick-to-act sister, I had predicted this would happen, and had already arranged for a new apartment. I had hired a lawyer and had all the paperwork ready for property division and claiming compensation. The next day, after I had moved all my belongings, I began negotiations for compensation and property division with my husband and sister along with my lawyer. My husband was present, still acting as if he was unrelated to this, and only my sister spoke. "As I said before, I'll pay whatever compensation you want. Just decide on your own." Hearing her words, my lawyer decided to claim compensation from my sister, in addition to my husband. My sister was still making payments on compensation claimed by her ex-husband, so the lawyer had previously advised me that claiming from her might be impossible. But since she said she'd pay anything, we decided to claim from her as well. When it came to property division, my sister said cheerfully, "This mansion is originally Mark's family property, so it wouldn't be part of the property division, right?" With an expressionless face, my lawyer answered her, "This building and land are owned by the company, so it's up to the company to decide." It seemed like my husband also thought this house belonged to his father, and he said, "Is that so? I thought this house belonged to my father," he asked, seemingly without much surprise. On the other hand, my sister turned to the lawyer. "Wait a minute. So, you're saying I can't live in this house?" The lawyer replied in an uptight way, "It's owned by the company, so if the company approves, you can continue living here." At these words, my sister seemed to relax a bit. "Why didn't you say that sooner? Since Mark, the CEO, will be living here, it should be fine, right?" The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst out laughing.
What are you talking about? Your sister here is the CEO, not Mark.
I laughed as I watched my sister, who was planning to remarry Mark, not knowing this fact. My sister immediately turned to Mark and shouted, "What? Mark, you're not the CEO?" Seeing Mark's troubled expression, I stepped in to explain to my sister. Mark is just an advisor without any executive power. I'm an executive officer, but they made me the CEO too. Mark's father, the founder, had been the CEO for a long time, but when he retired, he made me an executive officer and even appointed me as the CEO. The other directors also valued my accomplishments, so there was no opposition. On the other hand, my husband was made an advisor without executive power due to my father-in-law's arrangement. He received a director's salary, but he didn't actually have any work to do, so the amount was less than that of an ordinary employee. That's why I was the one who covered all our living expenses. My husband, who never worried about our household finances, didn't care whether the house he lived in was owned by the company or by my father-in-law. Although the house was owned by the company, my responsible father-in-law had been charging me rent, so I had always considered it to be a regular rental property. The lawyer asked me, laughing,
"So, is it okay to continue renting this house to Mark?"
My sister reacted to the word rent in the lawyer's question. "What do you mean by rent? You're going to charge Mark for it? It's company property, isn't it? Make it free." The lawyer, laughing again at my sister's words, presented the amount of rent. My sister was surprised to see the amount, and it seemed that it was the first time my husband knew about the rent too.
"So, a big house like this does have high rent. With my salary, I can't afford it."
With his board member salary, if he pays the rent, he would be left with almost no money, making it impossible for him to live. Regarding the division of property, during our 5-year marriage, my husband used up all of his small board member salary, and my salary disappeared due to the expensive rent and living expenses. We didn't have much savings left, just enough to split the savings in half. After the lawyer left, my sister, who had been hoping for a mansion, was completely deflated when she found out it was rented, and was standing there in a daze. My husband was smiling as usual, so I suggested, "Since your mother was happy that you're having a child, why don't you move out of here and go back to your parents' house?" My husband agreed, but I found it funny that I had to be so considerate to my soon-to-be ex-husband. I was worried about whether such a helpless husband could raise a child, but it wasn't my concern, so I decided to leave. To my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, I asked, "Sis, are you sure about the alimony payment? You were talking big, but you're still paying the alimony for your ex-husband, right?" I talked to her just to confirm, but my sister, who looked like she had come to her senses, was surprised. "Wait, do I have to pay alimony too?" To my surprised sister, who seemed like she hadn't been listening to anything discussed today, my husband quickly responded,
"You did say I can give you plenty of alimony, but you weren't expecting that from me, were you? My salary is really low."
My husband and my sister looked at each other, both with surprised expressions. I'm not a lawyer, but watching their exchange, I felt like bursting into laughter. As far as I was concerned, I already had their signatures on the divorce papers and the alimony claim documents, so I didn't care. But my husband and my sister seemed pathetic to me. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, seemed to have gone back to his parents' house, as I had advised, but I heard that my sister and her in-laws were constantly fighting. The main cause was that it turned out that my sister was not really pregnant with my ex-husband's child, and his mother, who had been expecting an heir, was furious. My ex-father-in-law, who seemed to have disliked my sister for taking his son away from me, didn't even talk to her. As for the alimony, my ex-father-in-law paid on my husband's behalf, and I received the full amount. But when my sister saw this, she asked her father-in-law, "Father-in-law, please, pay my alimony as well." In response to this, the father-in-law argued back,
"You have no right to call me father,"
and he yelled at her. Having received none of what she had hoped for, my sister fled from her husband's family home without a word and has been missing since. It's too stupid that she remarried my ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony. My ex-husband seemed to want to get back together with me, but he was scolded by his father.
"Someone like you shouldn't even think about having a family, especially since you can't even manage your own affairs properly."
Even if my ex-husband asked me to get back together with him, I would never consider getting back together with him. I lost trust in him when he cheated on me with my sister, and I was appalled by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. My ex-husband was dismissed from his board position and resigned, and now he seems to be working as a temporary staff member. Meanwhile, I'm still the CEO of the company, and I am enjoying my work so much that I'm not considering remarriage. Even after parting with my ex-husband, I keep in touch with my father-in-law and receive advice from him when I'm in trouble. For now, I want to dedicate myself to the company and work hard for the sake of all my employees, as if I am married to my work.